Welcome to the End of Life Conversations podcast. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, whether it's grief and loss, joy and celebration, all things related to the end of life.
We so enjoy all our insightful and passionate guests who generously tell their stories with compassion and wisdom. So let's get started. On this episode, we're very glad to speak with Duane Kelly. Duane is an award-winning author of 11 full-length plays. His plays often delve into end-of-life themes. The two most recent productions were a premiere of Abacus in Seattle in September of 2024, and the play Patrimony in Tulsa, Oklahoma in October of 2024. Abacus tells the story of a synthetic human replicant that experiences unexpected concerns as she cares for a man who suffers the indignities of old age and cognitive decline.
His plays were produced at the Edinburgh Fringe in 2022 and 2023. Duane is also writing a history book about the American West titled Journeys to Zion. Welcome, Duane.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm glad you could come and talk to us. I'm glad we were referred to you by our friend Rebecca, who has actually referred several people. We owe her a lot of things.
Yeah. She's a classic networker. That's just a gift she has. She connects people, and it's a wonderful talent. She certainly possesses it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we noticed that. That's great. That's how I met her, actually. So we always like to begin our podcasts with this question. When did you first become aware of death?
My father died when I was young. I was 15, the eldest of 7 children. And so he died at a young age. And so that's my first vivid experience. And I have a very vivid memory of going up to the casket and touching his face and being shocked that it had the sensation of cold concrete, not at all the warm human skin that we're all used to touching. So there was that. Mm-hmm. And then on a larger global level, one night my parents went out and I had to babysit because I was the oldest. And this was very early days of TV, the mid-1950s. And there was some documentary about World War II because, it hadn't ended that long ago. And it had footage of the American GIs entering the concentration camps in Europe and just the piles of the carnage. And so that has always stuck with me too on a global level as opposed to a family personal level.
Yeah. Wow, that's a pretty impressive and pretty impactful way to kind of face that. How old were you then?
I was probably 10, 9 or 10. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was born in 1950. So, yeah, I would have been 8, 9, 10 years old enough to be given babysitting responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So, in all of those two issues, horrific death on a global scale and man's evil to man, and then the intimacy of death within a family, they have both appeared in my plays. They just have cropped up without me consciously beckoning them. They're just there. So obviously they're bubbling away in my subconscious. Otherwise they wouldn't have shown up in my plays.
Right. Well, you just seem to have answered our second question, was how does death impact your story? Which very obviously it has, because it is bubbled up in your psyche and you've put it to paper. So, but tell us a little bit more about this. Like, how has death, you said it bubbles up with subconsciously. Do you think about death though, and just bring back those memories and consider the stories around them to relate to others?
I do. I don't think my interest in death or the frequency with which I think about it, I don't think it falls into the obsession category, but I constantly think about it. If I see a flower in bloom starting to fade, it's past its prime, often that will then, I can admire the beauty of the flower, but I'm also aware that symbolizes or signifies decline and death. So I'm constantly, my mind's going in that direction. It's just how I'm built. And it's not really a morbid or depressing thing. It's just how I think. And so of course that gets into my plays.
Yeah. Yeah. You're in good company here.
Yes, you are.
And I'm writing a book
Yeah.
right now. I don't want to digress too much, but I'm writing a history book, but it's about the first half of the 19th century. And so I'm very aware as I'm writing this that these characters, and even though it's nonfiction, I'm trying to give them flesh and dimension because I want them to be real people, to appear to like real people to the readers. So I'm aware that all these people I'm researching and writing about are gone. They're no longer on this earth. And I'm also aware that when they were alive, they had just as many hopes and fears and disappointments and dreams and loves and failures as I do. So I'm constantly reminded of it with the history book I'm working on too.
Sure. So it impacts everything, really. That's great. And that's kind of, that's why we started talking to people on this podcast, is because we both kind of hold this sense of end of life is with us at all times.
Right.
And it shows up in nature. It shows up in different kinds of losses.
Stories.
Stories. Yeah.
Yeah. But let me go back, Duane. So how are your plays received? Do people find it? I mean, we don't use the word morbid in our podcast because we kind of enjoy this. This is our jam. But I mean, it is like, I really appreciate that you said you're thinking about this flesh and blood human being who is no longer with us. They're dead. And, to remind readers or theater goers that death is imminent and our most favorite people have passed. Like, is that still considered morbid? Do you feel like you get that response to your plays?
No, I don't. I'm aware that that's one way. I'm aware that as a portion of people fear death or even are terrified of it. And so I'm aware that my plays could affect them, that group of people, in a negative way. But no, that's not how I feel about it. And that's not how I think my plays affect most people. When you're writing drama, whether it's a screenplay for a movie or a television show or the stage, if you are dealing with serious subjects, and death is, a serious subject, it's imperative that you have humor. You have to leaven the story with humor. Otherwise, it can become, excuse the pun, it can become deadly to an audience. It just, I mean, and even with, Shakespeare, think about Hamlet. There's, humor in Hamlet and jokes in Hamlet, but there's also, 7 people dead on the stage at the end of the play, and in the scene in the graveyard with Yorick and this holding the skull. There's deaths all over that play, but it's Shakespeare's a great writer, and there's plenty of light moments in it also.
Yeah. Very true. Well, tell us a little bit more about your current work, the work you're doing, both with the writing of the book and the plays. Do you have any other plays, or do you want to maybe just tell us a little bit about some of the most recent plays?
Well, Patrimony, which I just closed last night, actually, in Tulsa, is about a boy who had an imaginary friend when he was a boy. And now he's a troubled adolescent, 17 or 18. And his imaginary friend comes back into his life as an ally, is somebody to accompany him on his journey and get him through this hump, of adolescence and toward adulthood. And so that's one way that it came in. And this imaginary friend, his name's Albert, but he had a choice whether to come back into our world to help the boy or not. And he certainly loved the boy and wanted to help the boy, but also where he lives, the world where he lives, the imaginary friend, there's no death, right? It's this other world where death doesn't exist. And he's a very curious guy, and he wants to experience death. So one reason he comes back into our world is actually to taste mortality. because he's really curious. What is this thing? Because we don't have it in my world. So that's how that's one way that it comes into that play. And of course, he's sort of a Obi-Wan Kenobi, character, the sage, and guy gives the boy wisdom and helps him on his journey. So, and it's a very touching play. And the boy's journey, his psychological journey in the play, is from confusion and angst moving toward adulthood and accepting life. So that's how that play works. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I want to see it. When's it coming to
It
Seattle?
was produced 2 years
or Denver.
Yeah, it was produced 2 years ago, and I'm hoping it will have more productions. One thing about plays, I guess it's true of novels or, screenplays, is that you work hard to write a good script, and then if you're lucky, they can get produced. But then once they've gone out into the world, then it's kind of beyond your power. The gods have to smile on you, and every playwright, every playwright, would like to see their work on a stage in New York or London. But there's a large element of chance in that. So you can't worry too. You have to keep putting your play out there, but you can't worry too much about the outcomes. Just keep doing the work and trust that good things will happen.
Nice. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful. It sounds like
it does.
Excellent
And
work.
so, curiously, because this is about normalizing death, and I really appreciate that your character, one of the characters, is interested in experiencing life in order to go through the finality of death. Do you, what are the challenges around writing that kind of a storyline?
I don't want it to be too grim. That's why, I mentioned the importance of having comic and elements in it to leaven the heaviness. So, but I don't. I kind of like, this is who I am, and I think death is one of the great realities of our existence, and it can be seen as what gives our existence meaning. The fact that we're only here for a brief time, that makes this time precious and gives more meaning to our being here. So I don't worry too much about it being perceived as morbid, and I don't think of myself as morbid. This just happens to be something I'm interested in. But I'm also very aware that many poets and visual artists and composers, this is a big theme for artists, through the centuries. So I also realize I'm certainly not alone as an artist in paying attention to these issues. That's really important. Mm-hmm. I had a professor in college who told us once that the 3 great subjects of literature are love, death, and the passing of time. And that's always stuck with me. And then I think that, love and the passing of time, what gives them resonance, what gives them profundity is death. The fact that we're just here for a brief time. So if we love someone, that love isn't going to go on forever. It's death affects everything and influences how we see the world. One thing that a surprising development, and let me know if I'm digressing too much, but one development that I hadn't expected is that I formed a new relationship about a dozen years ago, and my partner's father was just a lovely man, and we really hit it off, and he had some dementia and other health issues at the end of his life, and I did a lot to take care of him. And now his wife, who's 95, is nearing the end of her life. But I grew up in a Christian context where there was, hell and brimstone and a fear of death. And these 2 people in my life, that they've approached death without fear. In fact, they've had gratitude that they realize that they've done well in life. They've had a good life. Few bad things have happened to them and their family, and they are leaving. They left in terms of Mary Lou, my mother-in-law. They're leaving with a sense of gratitude and peace and readiness Mary Lou's 95. In fact, she told me last week, she said, Duane, I'm ready. And she didn't say it with depression, with regret, just I'm ready, and I've been really lucky. I realized how lucky I have been and said, okay, yeah, I get it, Mary Lou. So I really value those two people in my life because they showed me another way in with real people, not reading about it in a book, that they gave me another model about how one could think about death as one ages. And I'd never run into that before. Right. It was more of a, am I going to go to hell, or, what's
fear, right?
Fear, and, there's a big guy up there sitting in judgment over all of us, and how, what kind of grade am I going to get? That's kind of how I grew up, and that's not how I think. And it's been nice to see these people that I'm intimately close with in my family. Yeah, that's been a gift to me.
Yeah. I love that because I also grew up with the hell and brimstone as my narrative, right? And so there's every day, rather than being grateful for another day to breathe, it was always like, oh God, what have I done, or what am I going to do, or what shouldn't I do? Because, God will punish me and I won't make it to heaven.
Right.
And, I've let go of that paradigm years and years ago, but I found it really interesting that when I was doing my chaplaincy, what does it call our work to our project, our practicum?
Yeah.
I met with 23 different people and did spiritual direction around end of life. And I was very curious to the experiences that people would how they met the conversation about death and dying. So those folks who did not have a spiritual practice or a religion in their life would talk about death and be like, they were sad about leaving their stuff or their kids or whatnot, but it wasn't really so stressful. But there were a few other people who couldn't even get in the door to talk about death because, as one woman said to me, she's like, I am so terrified that I've made God mad that I don't even want to think about dying, because if I pissed him off, I'm going to hell, And it was such a sad moment for me. I think we did a little spiritual direction around that, but truly there are people who spend their lives fearing death because what's on the other side. And there's others who are grateful for the breath of every day. So, I'm so grateful that you have this lived experience with these bookends of people.
Yeah.
And maybe, that's your next play.
Well, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, what I'm doing now is, I love writing plays, and in a play, they tend to be about 100 pages, 110. And so mentally, intellectually, and psychologically, I feel I can put my arms around it, this beast. And but what I found is my playwriting skills are not as transferable to a history book as I expected them to be. And this book is going to be 300 to 400 pages, and it's just too big to put my arms around, metaphorically speaking. And so it's therefore it's harder, at least for me. And so what I've had to do is I've had to prohibit myself from starting another play, because if I do, the history book will end up on the back burner. And I really want to finish the book. It's an important book, and it's a different beast. So that's So I have a number of plays that I still want to write, but I've been working on this book for 10 years off and on. So I really want to get it done. And I was just reading this morning in the New York Times, Biden, I think, is 81, Trump is 78, and I'm 74. So, here, those guys are being criticized for their senility. They're not that sharp anymore. So I'm aware of that. And physically, I'm very healthy, but, I want to continue writing as an alternative model to them, to Trump or Biden. Henry Kissinger died a year ago, 2 years ago. and he was 90. He was 100, but at age 99 he wrote another book. So that's one thing as I observe other people, life around me. The great variance in how we age is just, it's phenomenal. There's just so much variance, and you can't really predict how people are going to how their journey is going to go. I'm very with my near obsession about mortality. I'm just very aware that we're here for a brief time, and we have a moral obligation. I feel this very strongly to do the best we can with what we've been given, and so I want to keep working and trying to create good art that has meaning for other people. But you're right, Ana Luisa, about the terror. You remind me of I read maybe 10 years ago. I did some reading with Ernest Becker and his terror theory. Are you familiar with?
Mm-hmm.
And his point is that the fear of death is the driving force in history. Ernest Becker wrote some books about that. So that was one of his theories.
It does.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would love to, if you wouldn't mind, circle back a little bit, because I've just been reading a series of books. One was the monk and the robot. I don't know if you're familiar with that series, but it reminds me a little bit of what you talk about, the Abacus, because this author really delves into what it would be like for a machine to become sentient, and what sentience means, and how they relate with humans. And so I would like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear a little more about Abacus.
Absolutely. But give me the name of that book again.
Oh, it's called The Monk and the Robot. There's actually two of them, and I'll find the author and tell you before we're done here.
All right. Yeah, I do a ton of research for everything that I write. So I probably read 50 or 60 books about AI and death and dying as background for that play. So anyway, I'm very interested also in consciousness. What is consciousness? And there is no consensus in the neuroscience community about what that is. And I think in the spiritual community, there's probably not any consensus either.
Sure.
So, but I like a lot of writers who get it to write about this area, and it sounds like the author of The Monk and the Robot did that. You can use the robot, and I call her a replicant in my play, is kind of a metaphor or a anthropomorphization of a human. And so she's lacking something. She's not quite sure what it is. She finds herself becoming attached to this old man that she cares for in a way that wasn't part of her algorithms, and in a way that could be said to resemble something like love or affection. It's more than just doing jobs that she's been programmed to do. She starts to have feelings for him. And so I'm kind of playing on a metaphorical level with the need we all have to care for other people. That's, I think, a big part of what gives life meaning.
Yeah.
And so this desire to care for this human was not part of her programming, was not in her algorithms, and yet is kind of an emergent property. She starts to experience something like that. So that's part of her journey. And in fact, people who've seen the play or heard about it before they go, they tend to think that the old man is the protagonist, that the main character. He's not. It's the replicant.
Oh, wow.
She's the main character. She has the biggest arc. So I see her. I mean, there's only 5 characters in the play, so that they're all important. But it's the journey she goes through. And at the end of the play, I leave it unresolved what's going to happen to her. When he dies. She goes to his grave right after his funeral by herself and reads a poem, Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. So the play ends with that, and we don't know what's going to happen to her.
Wow. I love it.
Yeah.
Wow. There's actually a new movie that just came out called Wild Robot. It has almost the same theme again,
Oh yeah, that was actually a kid's book, because my kids love that book. And I was just going to say, they also read the Wanla trilogy, which I just thought about. And it's like a bunch of kids sent out and raised by robots that they call Mother. And really beautiful. Those are the two. The Wild Robot and the Wandla trilogy were books that my kids just adored, and we read them over and over again. But again, artificial intelligence, replicants, robots, and what is that moment when caring for something makes them sentient and makes them, like,
right.
grab on, and the sadness of losing your
Right.
robot too. Like, it's a machine, but it's a thing that's
Right.
a relationship, right?
Another
fascinating.
important book, a book that I did read is the Nobel Prize winner Kazuo Ishiguro, the British writer, Clara, Klara, Clara and the Sun. But he's treating the same subject, and it's no great surprise, that
Right.
that this is. We're going to see more of these movies and novels and television shows about this, because it's very much of our moment.
Yeah.
It's sort of our version of the 19th century Industrial Revolution. This is our version of that. And it's kind of scary. Where is this going to go? How much power is it going to have? We don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised, there's going to be more books like this. And I was even worried.
Yeah.
I started working on this play 6 or 7 years ago. And I felt then that I was ahead of the curve. Now, actually, the advances in AI have progressed so rapidly that they've kind of they bypassed the play. Not really, but, AI has come on faster than I think anyone thought it would.
Yeah, it is. It's getting a little frightening. You're right.
Yeah.
It's frightening. And, I was at the British Science Museum about maybe 8 years ago, and they had a show that was from puppets to AI. And the very beginning as you're going through, it had all these little small automatrons and small puppets. And then, it went on and on through the ages of how we've continued to work at making replicants of ourselves. And at the very end were those robots that were used with kids with autism that have like the very neutral face, and you were engaging. And I remember feeling both abject terror and surprise at humanity's inclination to try to reproduce ourselves, in spite of the fact that we still can't get along and do each other right.
Yeah.
Like, I left there. I actually have some of those books from that show, because I just kept thinking it's not okay. If we're still making wars and if we're still killing each other, why are we replicating ourselves?
Yeah. Maybe try and figure out how to do it better before we start to do it.
Right.
But I do think that's part of the thinking coming out of Silicon Valley and Seattle and, the Boston area. They've got a bit of a God complex that they think they can do it better than what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I think that's unlikely and probably dangerous to be thinking that way. We are flawed creatures. Inherently, we are flawed creatures. And to think that we can create a machine without flaws, I think, is hubristic and likely to lead to bad outcomes. Well, one thing I can share with you in the play that people would come up to me sometimes and talk to me about. There's one scene where the replicant, one of the characters, is a high-tech CEO, kind of a tech bro, type that they're not that uncommon these days. And his company created her, the replicant. And midway through the play, he asked her, "Well, do you have any other concerns?" They were talking about the health of the old man. And she said, "Yeah, I do have one." And he says, "Well, explain." And she said, let's hypothesize a human being born in America, has wonderful parents and grandparents, receives an education broad and deep, has good health, avoids war and poverty, falls in love as a young adult. The love is reciprocated. They reproduce. And then she looks at this tech bro guy and says, "And tell me what happens, Max." His name is Max. And he says, "No, what? You tell me." And she says, "She dies. No exception. She dies. And furthermore, everyone she loves dies." And she looks at him and said, Is that not absurd? This is the replicant talking. Is that not absurd? Have you ever discussed this? Have you ever discussed this with the designer? And so it's a strong scene, and she's starting to deal, to come to grips with the subject of your podcast. Is, what is this death thing, and how do people deal with it? So that's how I dramatize that in the play, and it's a strong scene. I'm proud of it. Yeah,
that's good.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I like it. Thanks for sharing that one. That's so important. So much we need to pay attention to. And, I think there's probably moments in our lives where we kind of do the same thing. It's like, what? Everybody dies? Oh.
right.
And it's kind of what we're here for.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I commend you to, for not celebrate isn't the right word, but having open, healthy discussions about it. I think that's good. I think to be more realistic and more accepting of our mortality is one source or one category of wisdom, and gives us more empathy toward the other people when we realize that we all share that great fate, the same fate of mortality. It can make us have more empathy toward our fellow human being.
Yeah,
it can. I have a lot of stories of how I wound up being here with Joaquin talking about death as our fun stuff. But have you ever read Thanatopsis?
No.
The William Cullen Bryant poem?
No.
I read that in I think it was 10th grade, in the primer and 10th grade. And I have it in front of me, but I just remember the last line, the last 3 lines, and it says, "By an unfaltering trust, approach thy grave, like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams." Those 3 little phrases were what completely sold me that I am so excited to die. I'm like I see myself in a chaise longue with one of my quilts that I have made, and I'm just going to very just cozily wrap myself up and just dream myself into death. I love that.
I hope that happens for you.
Yeah.
Me too. I mean, there's a lot of different ways, but if that's the way that I can do it, please make it so.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. And you can't help being aware of how much horror there is in the world, in Ukraine and, Israel and Gaza, and a couple of years ago in Syria, and a couple of years before that in Iraq. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people just, you said earlier on, Louisa, what business do we have making replicants when we can't do a decent job of, behaving ourselves? And, that's a very good point, because we're not really good at taking care of each other. At least on larger scales. Hopefully most of us are with our families, with people we love intimately, but we don't have it figured out about how to be good to each other at larger scales.
Right.
Yeah.
We haven't figured out how to being, right? How to live as beings, and we're creating other beings, and it's still, I don't know.
We have some work to do.
And we
do.
We've become really good at pigeonholing people into other categories. Whether it's by color of skin, or language they speak, or religion, spiritual beliefs. But instead of accepting, we have this tendency to make them the other and something to fear instead of support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. A way of controlling our world, I think, is part of that.
Right.
So we're kind of getting into the time we want to end this, but I think we had a couple more questions we like to ask. What do you think, Ana Luisa?
Let's ask, what frightens you most about the end of your life?
That I will not have made really good use of the brief time I've been given here. That's my biggest fear, that I will have squandered this treasure called human existence.
Oh,
that
wow.
That I don't really worry about. I mean, I have good, loving relationships with people, with my family and people I'm close to. So I feel good about that. But I also, I think most of us feel this way. I want my life to have made a difference. I want my time here to have meant something. And so I'm driven in that way. And so that's one thing I worry about.
Huh.
Sure. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true. Well, we also like to ask, is there anything that you wish we had asked you about?
No, I can't think of anything right now. We've covered the territory we've covered is what I thought you would be covering, and I've enjoyed talking about it. So no, not really. No, if any of your listeners know a theater producer in New York or London, tell them about tell them about me. But no, this has been great.
All right, yeah, we
That's
will.
wonderful.
We will put your www, your website into the podcast notes.
The notes.
So yeah, so people have a way to check in on you and see what you're doing and
Great.
Find out more about you if they'd like and be able to get in touch with you. So thank you so much for being here. You did send us a quote. Did you want to read that for us?
Sure.
Or do you want one of us to read it? We can do that.
I'll read it. It's I keep journals, and so my journals are full of quotes. But this is one that I came across recently that resonated for me, and it's by the American writer James Baldwin. History is not merely something to be read, and it does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. So I like that. It reminded me a little bit of what Kamala Harris said recently about her mother in did you think you fell from the sky in I forget now what she said, but did you think all this just happened to you and that there's no past behind you? You're not here alone. There's this whole train of people who were behind you who have allowed you to be in this moment. And so that sentiment. It's good to be aware of that. I think
I love that. Yeah. We stand in a long caravan of people,
ancestors.
Of ancestors and people who've come before and people who will carry on from us, and inshallah.
Oh, I just remembered what Kamala Harris said. Her mother said to her, maybe it was her grandmother, what? Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree and all this happened to you? No, there's this, as you said, a huge train, a caravan of ancestors behind you who have brought you to this moment. So it's a good thought.
Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, Duane. Thanks for connecting with us.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. We encourage you to subscribe to have access to premium episodes and extra resources. Links to our guests and their recommendations and a transcript of this episode will be in the podcast notes.
Yes, thank you so much. And please tell all your friends. Follow us on social media, and again, consider subscribing for some excellent premium content. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand. We also want to acknowledge that we live on unceded lands that have been cared for thousands of years by Indigenous peoples who are still here.